The first step in moving on in our project is to actually convert the CSS code that we've been written so far to SASS code. And so we're going to set up a couple of variables, and we're also going to nest selectors where that makes sense. And so here we are back in our SASS code. And actually we already have a lot of variables here going on, so mainly with the colors. But let's see if we can find some more. So I think for the colors, we already have variables for everything, right? I don't really see another color going on here. Or actually here is black. So why not also having a variable for black? So color black. Because again, later down the road, we may decide that the black that we want is not really complete black, but maybe only some really dark gray. And then we would have to change all of that manually. And so it's better to always have a variable so that we can change it very easily and very quickly. And so now I can replace it here, color black, and of course the same thing here. Now again, doing so with the RGBA and then defining a hexadecimal color in here only works with SASS. So in regular CSS, we really have to define the colors here separately for R, G, and B with a number ranging between 0 and 255, such as we had before. But now in SASS, we can put a hexadecimal number here, like we have with the black color, and then the RGBA function is still going to work. Alright, and there are no more color variables here. Now some people like to go really crazy here and also specify variables for all of this stuff, like family, weight, line height, and all of that. But I think that's not really necessary, because in fact we're only ever specifying this code once here. So we're not having this Lato font family all over the place. It's really just here. And so in fact we're only defining it in one place. And so there's no need to have a variable, alright? Now remember that we're still having here in the background this terminal running, where we're still detecting all the time if we're doing some changes to our SASS code, and then each time we change anything, it actually reloads the page, right? And so all of the changes that we did already should be reflected in here. And so during the development of this entire project, I will just keep this running here in the background, and we don't have to worry about this anymore. So this is our development setup. And now that we have our variables set up, at least for now, let's take a look at nesting our selectors. So remember that we're using the BEM methodology, so a block element modifier, and so we're using all of these really low specificity selectors. So we have header, header logo box, header text box, and so on and so forth. And so when we select these elements, we always do this just with the class selector. And so all of our selectors, they're really just only one class selector with one class. So they all have the same specificity, which is extremely low. Also, since each and every element actually has a class, nesting can be a bit difficult here, right? It looks like there's not much to nest here, right? It's different from the example that we had when we first looked at SASS, where we did simply nest all the elements. Like we had, remember, UL, and then in there we had the LI, and then in there we had the A. So right now we don't have that kind of structure because every element has its own class. But still, we can do nesting here. And I'm going to show you how. And this is how we do it. So remember what the ampersand operator does? It copies this selector here that we have up until this point, right? So actually all of this. So it's dot header. So if we now want to specify this declaration block here, we can actually write it this way, logo box. And that's it. So we copy the code in here, and here we go. So this is now nested inside each other, and the code, when compiled, will be exactly the same. Because again, this header here, it's like it's copied here. So imagine that we copy it, and then we paste it here, and so it looks exactly the way we had before, right? And so instead of having to write header all the time in each single element that we want to select, we can just use nesting like this. So let's put these all together here, all of these which have to do with the header. So it's all of these. And then we can just replace the header with the ampersand operator. Now here in Visual Studio Code, when I select something, and then hit Command D, it will automatically select the next instance, which is the same. So you see here I have header selected, and you see that already down here it's becoming with a different color, and now if I hit Command D, then it also gets selected. And you see these two cursors here blinking. So we have multiple cursors now, and if I now write the ampersand, it will replace both of them. Alright, so again, this is not really a CSS feature, but it's a feature of this text editor, and I know that Atom does this as well, and probably also brackets, and I know that Sublime Text also does it. And so you can try to figure out how your text editor does this trick. It's really handy sometimes to replace multiple instances of the same text all at the same time. Alright, and so that's it. So I really like this approach with nesting the selectors like this, because you see it's like really all encapsulated, all in this big one header block, okay? So when scanning down our code, we can see, okay, this is the header, then inside we have this declarations for the header, and then from there we move down to this element logo box, logo, and text box. Okay, so let's save this and let's actually take a look at the style CSS. And so here you see that actually what I explained you is exactly what is working. So you have the header declaration block, which starts here, ends here. Then we have the header logo box, the header logo. So exactly what we had before doing this nesting, right? So we change this in the SASS, but it looks exactly the same in the output. So this is what we wanted. Now the next thing here with the heading primary. So we can do the same here, right? So let's actually do it. And all we have to do is to basically, not that much code. Oh, this is really fast. So cut this one and put it in here. Because this is heading primary main, so this is the modifier here, right? And so now here, such as we had before, I can replace it with the ampersand. And that's actually it. So it will be heading primary dash dash main, and here dash dash sub. Alright, makes sense? So again, it's this nicely encapsulated block which now contains all of the code for the heading primary all at the same time. And we can now do the same thing here with the button, of course. So we have button link, visited, hover, active, so these for pseudo classes, and then here this modifier, and then this pseudo element, and we can wrap them all into one huge block, okay? So how do we do that? And actually I want you to do it. So it's a small challenge here, so pause the video and try to nest all of this code into one huge block. Maybe it's not exactly easy at this point, but it's a nice challenge, and so I hope that you can manage to do it. Hopefully you managed to do that. So let's now take a look how I would do it. So actually, let's start by just writing button here, and then start by copying all of that in there. Okay, and so now we can just remove this here, and such as again, replace this with the ampersand operator. And now I will start hitting Command D to select all of these button instances, okay? So button, button, and there's more button, button. Okay, and that's it. And so now replace all of these with the ampersand. Okay, so we have now button linked, button visited, button hover, button active, button white, and button after, and button white after, and button hover after, and button animated. Okay, but this is still not perfect, right? Because we can do more. We can also replace this part here because it's already here. Make sense? So we can just do it like this. Copy this entire thing in here and take this out. Okay, makes sense? So let's try to read that. So here we have, this will translate to button dash dash white, and then here it will translate to button dash dash white, and then the after pseudo class. Okay? Does it make sense? Now we can do the same thing in here. So let's go to the hover part, which is up there. and put it here. All right, so again, this was repeated, this part, right? So let me put it back very shortly. So this was already here. So why write it again? We can just take it out and replace it with the ampersand operator here. And so this is going to translate to button, hover, after. And I think that now we're good. Now everything is nicely nested, and I think it makes a lot more sense like this. It's easier to read, and it's all encapsulated in this small block that we have. Now I know that it may take some time to get used to this nesting and to make sense out of it, but you'll see that with practice, and maybe with all the practice that you're going to take while we're building this project, after that it will make sense to you and you will be so used to it that it's no problem anymore. Just one last final check to see if everything is still working, and yes, it is. So our button works exactly the same as before. So all the logic was preserved even after we changed all of this code here, okay? So that was my goal for this lecture, so we're now ready to move on. With our code now nicely organized with some variables and nesting, we're now ready to implement the CSS architecture that we've been talking about earlier. And what I mean is a 7-1 pattern, where we create 7 folders and one main SASS file to import all the files that are in these folders. So let's start by creating the base folder, which is where we're going to put our basic project definitions. So like a project boilerplate. So new folder, base. Okay, so all of these folders are going to be inside of the SASS folder, of course. Now inside of this base folder, we should have a file which is also called base. So a base SASS file. And this file will be for the real low-level basics, such as resets and styles for the HTML and body element selectors. Now this file should be a partial, so that we can later import it into the main SASS file. So remember the first lecture ever that we had about SASS? Back then I talked about partials and imports. And so that's what I'm meaning here. So the partial files, they always start with an underscore. So like this. And if I want to call this file base, then I just have to write underscore base.scss. And that's it. So now this is a partial SASS file. Okay? And so let's actually import it into our main file. And I will put it here at the top. And all we have to do now is simply write @import and then the path to the file. So it is in the base folder, right? Because remember, we are in the main file, so we are here in the folder system. And so from here, we just have to move into the base folder, and then from there, we select the base file. And now we don't have to use the underscore. All we have to do is base. So no underscore and no SCSS. This is enough for SASS to understand what we want to import here, okay? And that's it. Now some other files that we usually want in the base folder are files for animations. So animations.scss. Then we usually also have a file for typography. So typography.scss. And so we're going to fill all of these files over the next lectures, okay? And another one for utilities as well. And again, you will see in one of the next lectures. So utilities.scss. And that's enough for the base folder. And they keep opening up here, but we can just close them. This one as well. All right. Now, once you see the whole picture with all of the folders and all the files, then everything will fall into place and make more sense to you. Now, I want you to keep in mind that this architecture is really designed to handle large, multi-page websites or web apps. And so maybe for a small landing page, like the project that we're working on here, this might seem like a bit too much, a bit overkill, right? But once you start working on a really huge project, then you'll appreciate how this really makes things easier, okay? So it's really important to have an architecture like this in place, especially when we're working on a larger project. Okay, but let's move on and create another folder here. And this one is called abstract. And in this folder, we're only going to put code that's not going to output any CSS. So we already saw what type of code is that. So variables, mixins, and stuff like that. So let's actually put these files in here. And now to make my life a bit easier, I will actually do it using the command line, okay? But you, of course, if you don't like the terminal already, you can do it by hand in your code editor. I will just move to SASS and then abstract. And then I will use touch to add some files here. And on Windows, you can use the edit command. So as I was saying, the files that we want here is for variables, for mixins, and for functions. And you can see that I can write all of these files that I want to create here in one line in the touch command. So here are these 3 files that I just created, right? All right, next up, let's create a components folder. And in that folder, we're then going to create one file for each of our components. And remember that components are our reusable building blocks that make up our websites or apps. And they should also be usable anywhere on the page so that they are completely independent and held together by the layout of the page, right? So let's create that folder. Components. And for now, we're going to leave it empty because we don't really have a component yet. Well, actually we do have, but let's worry about that later, okay? So this is the components folder, and remember that the components are held together by the layout of the page. And since I was talking about layouts, we also need a layout folder for each piece of the global layout of the entire project. So in the layout folder, we're going to have a global footer, header, etc. So stuff like that. So mkdir layout. So remember that this architecture is designed for multi-page projects. And so these layout elements should work everywhere and on all pages, right? So again, our components are our building blocks, which are independent and reusable everywhere across our website. And then the layout is what holds all of these components together. But again, we're going to see how that works when we really dive deep into the project. Now, if we have very specific styles for a specific page, like for example a home page, we can then create a new file for that specific page, and we do that in the pages folder. So mkdir pages. And that's actually what's going to happen in our case, because we can treat the landing page that we're building as like the home page, and there will certainly be styles that are only going to apply to that page. And then later on, if our fictional company will expand and add more pages, then they can have different styles for the other different pages. So let's actually create that one. So pages and then touch home.scss and go back. And so these are the most important folders that we're going to use the most. But you see that we only have 5 folders so far, so there are still 2 missing. So the 7.1 architecture also has a folder for themes in case that you're doing like a web app with different themes. And there's also a vendors folder where you can put third-party CSS, like for example the CSS file of a Bootstrap, or an icon system, or an animation framework, all right? But for now, we're going to leave these empty in this project. Now, what we have to do is to, of course, import all of these files here into the main file, right? So for now, we don't have much here, but let's now import what we have. And actually, I'm just going to copy this one. So for the base, we have animations. Actually, it's once more. So animations, base, typography, and utilities. All right. Now in the abstract, it actually comes before, so let's put it before here. So import abstracts and then functions. And let me just copy this entire mixins and then variables. All right, so abstracts, base, components is still empty, so nothing there, layout as well, and now pages. So import pages and home. So what I suggest we do next is to actually sort all of this code into different files, because the goal is that in the end this main file only serves to import all the other files. So there will be no code here in this file except for all these import declarations. Okay? So let's put all of this code where it belongs. So these are variables, and we know that there's a file just for that. So that's it. And let's see if our SASS already compiled here. Well, it seems like something is going wrong here. Well, let's just close this one and try it again. Okay. Actually, we can do it here. Clear. And remember how it works? We just have to write npm run and then the name of our script that we wrote here. So it's called compile and SASS. So compile SASS. And now it's waiting for that we make some change here, because of this W flag here, it only works on changes. So let's just change something here. I don't know. We can just, like delete this from here actually. And so save it and let's see what it does. And so so here we go. Now it's working again. And this should be reloaded automatically. And so you see that it still works, which means that our import here was successful. We can actually check it out here as well. And so everything is still working just fine. So this is our variables file, and we're going to add a lot of variables in here over the next lectures, but for now let's close it, okay? So these things here, they are going into the base file, okay? So base, because they are the basic definitions about our entire project. Next we have this animations file here, and we have some animations here, right? So let's put them in there. So keyframes and all of this code. So now it's all nicely separated. Whenever we want to see an animation, check out how they work or change something, we already know all we have to do is to go into this animations file. So great. Now the button, and actually we can say that the button is a component because it's certainly a block, and so we can call it a component. So it's reusable across the page, it's independent, it works everywhere, and it's a building block that we can use wherever we want on our page. So let's actually create a new file here in the components, okay? This time I'm going to do it here in the editor. So button.scss. I'm going to put the code in there. So the entire button code goes here, okay? And now, of course, never forget that we have to import it, right? So base and then components. So here, import okay. And so now we imported this file. We can close it. So what else do we have here? We have the header. Now the header I'm not going to treat as a component. I'm actually going to treat it as a layout element. So we know that probably on each page that we'll have in this website. So once again, imagine that the website is going to expand, and then on each page we're going to have this header, right? And so this is a layout. So let's add a file here in the layout for the header. Header.scss. Okay. Now this is a bit subjective, of course. I mean, there's no right and wrong in how you divide your code. So if you will say that this is a component, then maybe you're not wrong, and you can, of course, then go ahead and create a component for this code. But I think this is better organized as being an element of our layout. So it's simply just a question of how we name things here, but I like to say that it's layout, and so I create a file in the layout folder. And then, of course, I have to include it in here as well. So import the layout and then header. Now all of this process might seem a bit cumbersome to you, a bit boring and a bit too much work, but of course ideally you start by doing this right from the beginning. You don't start to write your CSS the way we did it and then you sort everything into these folders. Now ideally you start right from the beginning of the project by having this organization, this architecture, right? This is just because I didn't want to start the course with this difficult stuff, with this more confusing stuff. I just wanted to start the course with coding. And so now we have to quickly go through this process and convert everything to this new architecture, okay? Now what else do we have? The heading primary. Oh, and actually that's it. So the heading primary, I will classify it as being an element of our typography, okay? So let's open this typography here and put this here. So again, you could argue that this is a component, and I couldn't say that you're wrong, but I like to organize this piece of code here into my typography file, because it's really related to typography in this case, and so this seems the most intuitive place for me when I will be looking for the heading. Alright, and something else that we should do is, if we look at this base here, you will see that we also have a lot of typography stuff in here. So actually we should move this to typography. So everything that is typography related, we should have right in this file. So this entire code here, not all of the code, but everything except this one here, should go to the typography. So everything except this part. And so then here, we just delete everything except this one. Okay, so everything that is related with typography is now in here. So let's close it. And now you could argue once more that this font size here is also for typography. And while I also agree with that, we saw before when we did our conversion to rams that this acts more like an overall setting for how we size our entire page, right? So I don't see this as much as typography. I see this more like really a base definition, a global definition, which defines what one rem should be. Let me actually write it down here, okay? This defines what one rem is. And that's why I'm going to leave it here, because that's what it is really. So we have a reset here, and this box sizing is actually also part of it. And then here this overall one rem setting is also here in our base. So we have base animations, we have typography, then we're going to add some utilities here later. We already have one component, we have one piece of the layout. Homes is still empty by now. Variables, mixins, and we don't have any mixin yet, and also no function. So let's leave them empty for now. So this package JSON, I can also close it, this one as well, this one. And okay, so don't need any of this. And alright, so that is our architecture. So again, you might not need all of these different files and folders for a really small project like this one. But I really want you to get used to this structure, because if you don't organize your SASS files like this, if you just have a bunch of unrelated files or even everything in just one file, it will become a real nightmare when you someday have to maintain all this code. Imagine that you have 10,000 lines of code one day, and then you want to maintain all of this. You want to change something very deep in the code, and then it will be really difficult. So it's always best to start this from the beginning and then keep using the system all throughout the project. And that's what I wanted to show you in this lecture and overall in this entire course, really, because I've been talking a lot about maintenance and all that stuff because it's really important for a professional CSS developer like you want to become.